Good morning, Chad. Thank you for joining me today on this morning and my evening. Almost
My pleasure.
12-hour difference, almost. Before we move ahead and talk about your beautiful book, Thanks a Lot, Universe, could you first, tell us a little about yourself and then, of course, give us an elevator pitch to your book, which I'm sure you have done it a lot of times already.
Sure, I have. Yeah, it's one of those things as an author, you learn quickly that it's something you should always have in your back pocket. You never know when someone's
Right,
going to ask. So yeah, my name is Chad Lucas. I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is on the east coast of Canada, for any
right.
of your viewers who might not be familiar. Yeah, I started my career as a journalist, as a
Okay.
newspaper reporter. I wrote a parenting column for a while. But I've always wanted to be an author as well. I mean, that was kind of my dream ever since I was a little kid. So I've always been writing fiction kind of on the side, and was lucky enough to land a publishing contract with this book. So Thanks a Lot Universe is about two boys, Brian and Ezra. Brian deals with a lot of social anxiety,
Right.
which gets worse after he goes through a really difficult time with his family, and he actually ends up in foster care. And the other boy's name is Ezra. Ezra is Brian's teammate on the basketball team. And Ezra sees Brian struggling. He really wants to help. He's also got a crush on Brian, and he's not sure yet if he wants to reveal that in the seventh grade,
Right.
knowing what junior high and middle school can be like. So it's sort of the story is kind of the journey of these two boys as they get to know each other, kind of open up to each other a little bit, and help each other through some of their challenges.
Right, right. I think that's very well put together, and it definitely shows that you have worked a lot of times on that. So
I've
yes,
had
because
practice.
because when we as reviewers, when we have to write synopsis or talk about in reviews, we always struggle because people don't want spoilers these days. So
No.
we have to be super careful about all of that. So Chad, I wanted to know that this is your first book, right? This is your debut novel. So
Yes.
how was the writing process like? And when did the idea for this book came in your mind, and how long did you take to write it? So just a snippet into your into your writing
Sure.
process.
Yeah, and this book actually began, I had the idea and the character of Brian a really long time ago, like
Okay.
almost 20 years ago, to be
Oh
honest.
my God.
Yeah, and it's one of those ones, I've written other things.
Right.
I kind of set this one aside. I would come back to it. And then it was probably 6 or 7 years ago, I really started working on this one. And again, I tried it a couple of different ways, and it wasn't until I brought Ezra in as a second narrator, which kind of wasn't in my original idea, that the
Okay.
story really took off. So yeah, for me, a lot of trial and error in my writing process I found with a lot of my story ideas. But this is one, yeah, it kind of just didn't leave me alone. I kind of, I park it for years and work on other things, and Brian's story just kind of stuck with me. So I kept coming back to it, and finally figured out, once I brought Ezra in, that's when things really kind of took off.
Right. No, no, no. I would like to thank you as a reader and on behalf of everybody who's loved that this book that we loved it. So thank you for believing in both your characters and also in yourself for for pulling it off, because I know for a fact that authors have stories which comes in glimpses and pieces, because I've spoken to so
Yeah.
many of them. But 20 years is a long time to stay with a character.
Yeah.
Right. So in that respect, Chad, if you would allow me to ask that, this is a middle grade book, and compared to the YA, when we look at the book publishing industry right now, so middle grade has started to kind of steadily, it's also growing, and it's kind of
Mhm.
becoming parallel to the YA industry, which is a bigger industry. So was there any conscious choice for you making your book a middle grade novel? Was it because of the character's age, or did you specifically wanted to write a middle grade story?
I actually, in the process of all those years of working on it, I had tried it as a YA at one point, and
Okay,
it just didn't quite click.
sit right.
Um, and so yeah, and so I ended up bringing it down to middle grade. But I mean, most of the things I've tried to write have kind of straddled that border a little bit, to be
Right.
honest. I mean, this kind of falls into what is becoming known as upper middle grade.
Upper middle grade. Yeah.
And actually, I got a great review from the School Library Journal just last week. But one of the things they said is that, you know, this is kind of a great book for, it could fit in middle grade, it could fit in YA. It's great for kids who are sort of in that middle gap. And
Right.
I mean, I didn't set out consciously to put it there, but, you know, that's something I've noticed even, you know, with my kids. You know, my oldest is a voracious reader. They're 16 now. But once they hit that sort of 12, 13, starting to grow out of middle grade, but not quite ready for YA, there is a bit of a gap there sometimes. So, you know, I think we do need books that sort of bridge that gap a little bit, whether you call that upper middle grade or young YA or whatever that is. But, you know, to make sure that, you know, kids who love middle grade still have somewhere to go as they move into YA.
Right. I would like to tell you, like, just a personal anecdote. I read middle grades whenever I want happiness in the world. I
Yeah.
think, I think with YA novels, the struggles. I mean, the categoristic choice of a YA novel is that, is that one choice that these characters are going to make, which is going to, end up becoming their lives. And I don't want to read always about those choices because I'm still struggling with mine. I'm 21-year-old. But so every time I feel too overwhelmed with everything that's happening with COVID around and everything, so I make sure to go back to middle grade novel. And currently, I have been on a drive to make people read your book because it's available on Scribd Audible. So, and I have a lot of friends who absolutely loved The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, if you have heard about that book. So even though it's an adult fantasy, the vibes and the happiness, the wholesomeness of the characters are pretty similar to what your book has. So I've been recommending it very forcefully to them. You have to read this. You have to read this. And all of these people are adults, and some of them, in fact, they did read it and they loved it. So the whole notion of middle grade, books just being for kids, I think, is also kind of is a game changer because a lot of adults are also reading these books.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have an 11-year-old son, and I
Right,
still read out loud to him all the time. And, you know, I enjoy that as much as I think he does.
right,
You know, librarians, but librarians obviously are a big market for middle grade, but I think anyone, and I think you've hit on something, you know, I mean, there's a lot of serious issues in this book, as you know.
right,
But one of the things that middle grade, I think, really does try to do is leave readers with a little bit of hope. You know,
right.
12, 13, 10, 11, 12, 13-year olds, they're dealing with some serious stuff in their lives sometimes, but you know, they're still, I guess, young and optimistic enough that you want to make sure that you're leaving them with hope that things can be better. So I do think that's a trademark of middle grade. You know, it'll
Right.
often tackle serious issues, but you do want to leave your readers with a hopeful, kind of optimistic place as well.
This is so interesting because my next question was about to be about the difficult topics that you have covered in your story, and including sexuality, mental health, police, I mean brutality with the police, the mom being in the hospital, and so on and so forth. So how did you draw the line? Because as you said, you have to still keep it hopeful, but you have to also give them the taste of realness, keep it raw, honest. So how much
Mm.
of a struggle was it? Like, was it like a conscious choice on your part that, okay, I'm doing a little too much, so let me just take a step back and, revise and re-edit. So could you like take us
Yeah,
through that?
yeah, I mean, that's one where, you know, I would get readers too, kind of get
Better
input from
readers.
others to see what they
Yeah.
think. Editor, of course, would
Yeah.
give some good suggestions there. But, you know, I think sometimes we underestimate kids at that age,
Hmm.
and what they're ready for. You know, when you're most kids, and we've seen this unfortunately, particularly around discussions around sexuality. You know, a lot of times people say, "Oh, why is that in a middle grade book?" Well, when you're 11 or 12, you know, you're figuring these things out. You know,
Yeah,
not
per
all. I mean, obviously, there are many who figure it out later in life, but
yeah.
a lot, you know, a lot of kids, by the time they're in the 6th or 7th grade, they're starting to realize who they're attracted to, right? So, you know, I think we underestimate kids if we try to keep books too scrubbed of difficult topics. So, you know, it's definitely a fine balance, but I think we don't want to shy away from addressing tough topics in middle grade, because I think kids are ready for it. And to be honest, kids can tell if you're talking down to them, or if you're trying to make things a little too neat and tidy. You
Right.
know, there's this book does end with hope, but it doesn't end with sort of a neat and tidy happy ever after as well, right? There's still sort of some open-ended questions of kind of what Brian's life is going to be like from here. So I think that's important too. That is a balance. You want to encourage kids, but you don't want to just sort of patronizingly tell them everything's going to be okay, because kids are
Right.
too smart. Kids are too smart for that.
Yeah, I was just about to say that, I think we don't give kids enough credit.
Yeah.
And they really have that innate ability to kind of, understand. And sometimes they understand not only by what we speak, but they also, they have this ability to grasp non-verbal communication even more better than adults for some reason I've
Yeah.
seen in my personal life. So
Yeah.
you have to be really careful how you deal with children and what you tell them, and because they can really be very pro at spotting lies. So yes, kudos there. For me, Chad, personally, I think I shared this with you as well. Right before I got I got to hear your book, I was actively looking for books that had positive parenthood, and specifically a healthy relationship between a dad and a son. In
Mm.
fiction, because most of the books that I've read were mostly nonfiction, and there's just so much you can do with nonfiction. So I think when I read this book, I saw it also to have a very strong underlying theme of fatherhood, and Richie and Brian's relationship with their dad is quite the central and quite at the heart of the story, I feel. So, in that respect, what can you tell us? And also, like, did you take inspiration from your own children, or, did you speak to other children, or like, what's just your general opinion on this?
Sure. Yeah. It's a complicated relationship in the book, as you know, and
Right,
this isn't too much of a spoiler because it happens in quite early in the book. But
right,
Brian's and Richie's dad actually is in trouble with the law, and so he's kind of absent for a good chunk of the book. But Brian's still in touch with him in various ways,
right,
um, and I really wanted to show that complex relationship. That just because he's in trouble with the law doesn't mean he's a bad father.
right.
He's made some choices, but people are complex and parents are complex, and I think kids know that too. And when you're around that middle grade age, junior high is when you start to, I think, see your parents as not just the
The
people who take care of
superheroes,
you.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. You're starting to see your parents in a more
the real
realistic and
life,
human
yeah,
light, I guess, and that can be a great thing, but it can also be a bit of a scary thing
scary
sometimes
thing, yeah.
too. So yeah, so I really wanted to show um, a father-son, in this case, relationship that, yeah, has all of those nuances and challenges, and it's not, Brian's dad's not perfect. At one point, Brian mentions he's probably not going to win Parent of the Year, but it's not sort of a purely one-sided, he's a bad person, it's a bad relationship either. There's a lot of complexity and nuance there. So yeah, I mean, again, I think sometimes we joke that often parents are just absent in middle grade. You see a lot of books about orphans or things like that because it's just easier sometimes.
Yeah.
But diving into those complexities, I think, can be really key for kids too.
Yeah, I think we all are so morally gray people, and for some reason, when it comes to parents, I've seen that be it YA, adults, or even contemporaries of fantasy, as you said, they usually either kill the parents, or they're orphans, or or they're
Yeah,
bad people, or they're moving away from them. Rarely do you come across books with very positive parenthood, which is why I had posted that asking for a recommendation in a group of
mm,
60,000 people on
yeah,
Facebook, and not even a single comment turned up, and it was like 15 days ago, and usually that group is very active with recommendations.
okay,
So I don't know, like maybe there aren't too many books, or if even if they are, probably people just haven't read them. So I think Brian's relationship with his dad was so beautifully portrayed, because the fact that you just pointed out that he was not perfect, and
mm,
somewhere along the book, of course, we can't talk about the spoilers, but there is this whole conversation in the book where, you see Brian having that internal conflict within himself,
mm,
whether what should he do. And then, of
yeah,
course, towards the end as well, you have him. So that was really great. And I really, enjoyed most of it. Moving on, I would like to talk a little about both your two protagonists, that is Brian and Ezra. Now,
mm,
they both kind of had very distinct voices, And I wouldn't go ahead and call Ezra to be a jock, whereas Brian to be a nerd, but it kind of felt like that a little bit to me. But it was never like, actively mentioned. So how was the writing process, character creation process for both these boys, and who do you identify more with?
Sure. Yeah. Just to go to your jocks versus nerd comment for a second, that was actually something, I was really trying to subvert a little bit in this book. They're both on the basketball team. They're both
Yeah,
athletes a little bit. They're both bench warmers. They spend most of the time on the bench as opposed to like, the
right,
star players.
right,
But, at the same time, Brian's wrestling with anxiety.
right.
Ezra's, he's a musician. He's questioning his sexuality. I really wanted to show that, I'm not a big fan of the jock stereotype in books where
Thank God. Yeah,
yeah, the super athletic kid is always sort of really popular and sometimes kind of mean or presented
yeah,
as not very bright.
yeah.
I wanted to challenge that a little bit and show that,
Right,
athletic kids can cover a lot of ground.
right,
But yeah, in terms of making them distinct, yeah, they are very different. And I tried to, even in the way that I wrote them a little bit. So, in Brian's chapters, he's got a lot of internal arguments and making lists and things like that. In Ezra's chapters, Ezra's more of an outgoing kid, so there's a lot more like texting in his chapters. His chapters tend to have more jokes in them because Ezra's just kind of a
right.
jokester. So I
Lighter.
tried even stylistically in the way I wrote their different chapters, I tried to do a few different things to set them apart as
Right.
well.
No, I was just coming to this as well, that I felt that a large part of why this book, kind of appeals to me so much was because you've been able to handle the dark things with the
Mm,
lighter and happiness and that whole moodiness of it with, with Ezra's character. Because every time you read his part of story, I mean, I'm not trying to trivialize his coming out experience,
yeah,
but compared to what was happening with Brian's life, it did feel like, okay, this is easier and this is more fun to follow. Whereas, Brian is a little bit struggling at this point of time. He's
yeah.
having his mental health issues at right now. So yes. Now I'm going to talk about my favorite character, and which is not
Okay.
Brian, which is not Ezra. It's Richie, and you already know that. So one of the greatest things about Richie was this, just the way he's written. I think I would just want to go and hug Richie, or or just would want him to come down to my house and play with him, because he's so so real and so honest. And I mean, most kids are like that, but there's something
Mm,
so special and so unique about Richie, which I clearly can't put a hand on and say that okay, this is the thing. So maybe you can tell us, what did you have in mind while you were writing Richie, and yeah.
sure. Yeah. So Richie is Brian's little brother. He's 9 going on 10. And he was a really fun character to write. He is one of those kids who just doesn't have a filter. He says exactly what he thinks.
Yeah,
Um, and I really wanted to kind of have this interplay between him and Brian, and that, Brian's the older brother. Brian feels responsible for Richie. But Richie's more outgoing. He's more fearless. And there's a little bit of give and take where, Brian really thinks he's looking after Richie, but there are times when Richie kind of steps up and helps out Brian as well when
right,
Brian's having trouble, verbalizing things or and Brian jokes at one point that Richie's indestructible, but you kind of do get these little hints of Richie's emotion too that,
right,
I tried to write, you get very into Brian's head and Brian's feelings. And I wanted to kind of show Richie a little bit that, he's a character who seems like he has it all together, but there's more going on under the surface as well. So he was a really fun character to write, and he got to make some pretty good jokes in this book too. So that was fun.
right. Also, I think it's interesting to highlight that the siblinghood that both these boys share is so beautiful. I mean, you could not only just see love and respect and all of that, but you can also see a lot of trust. And
Mm,
specifically from Richie's side, him looking about to his elder brother, and specifically at this one point of time, again, I can't reveal spoilers, but at this one point of time when they're kind of on the go, and Brian is kind of running away from some place, and he ends up in a certain place, and you see him, he's following him right there. And then there's this whole bathroom episode that happen in the loo, and then all Richie wants is a goddamn pizza. And all of that is so real. So so writing siblinghood. So, can you share something about that? So, like, how much of Richie or Brian or Ezra would you personally relate yourself with?
sure. There's probably more of me in Ezra, to be honest,
Okay.
than the others. the first time I saw the cover, I was a voracious reader as a kid, but I didn't growing up reading a lot of books with kids who look like me. Ezra is biracial. He's questioning his sexuality. Those are all things I went through when I was that age. So to see him on the cover really, really stood out to me. And it was actually quite emotional the first time I saw it.
Right.
Um, yeah, but in terms of that sibling relationship, I mean, I have a younger brother. I've got 4 kids, so I see a lot of
Ah,
sibling dynamics. So,
right.
I've watched a lot of sibling dynamics over the years for sure. So, definitely drew on a little bit of that.
You
But
so so
they
so
both
definitely so definitely you know the good, you know the bad, and you know
and the ugly.
what do you want to do with that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Right. So
yeah.
if I can quickly look through the questions that I have. So next up, I wanted to know that let's say Richie and Brian kind of come over to your house, just for like you need to look over them for one day. So what plans do you have for them? Like what would you do? What would you treat them with? Or just what would you talk with these two boys? Have you ever thought about it?
Sure, that's a good question. Um, Brian is pretty quiet, so wouldn't overschedule Brian because he's not. He likes to kind of be left to do his thing. Give him a
Right.
basketball, let him go shoot around in the yard. Basically, leave him alone. He'd be happy, I think.
Right.
Richie would happily play video games and eat junk food, and he's pretty easy to entertain too.
And,
Probably
and
try to
and
put.
I think because you mentioned you have 4 kids, so they would kind of, Richie would kind of get into them and start
Oh yeah,
playing,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. Yeah, if
Yeah.
Brian came to my house with 4 other kids, he'd be the quiet kid who kind of hangs it by himself, and Richie'd be the kid who just throws himself right in the middle of everybody and makes himself the center of attention.
Right. 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 Another very interesting thing that, I think we've already kind of mentioned in the beginning, that Ezra has a crush on Brian, right? And
Mhm.
for Brian, it's never evidently mentioned whether he's heterosexual or whether he's queer. So, like, I don't remember reading any sort of a label to his character as of now at
Mm.
this point of time. And I was speaking to a lot of other friends on Goodreads, through Goodreads, the people who've read the book. So we were discussing kind of among ourselves, and they all wanted to know that whether, was it done on purpose? Do you have plans for the sequel where you probably and potentially would want to explore, Ezra and Brian's future together?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I do. I would love to write a sequel and have some ideas in mind. So, it's one of those things where if the book does well,
Yippee!
then yeah.
Yeah.
So the more copies people buy, the better chance that you'll get to see a sequel someday.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I did want to leave it a bit open-ended
Right.
because Brian is a kid who he's a kid who second guesses himself, who deals with a lot, and some again, like we talked about earlier, some kids are pretty sure by that age, but some kids aren't. So I did want it. I didn't want to sort of define too much where Brian lands in this book because I think that's realistic too, and I think more and more, what kids decide at 12 might not be how they feel at 16 or at 24, right? I mean, I think gender and
Sexuality,
sexuality are
I
yeah,
think sexuality is definitely a spectrum, and
yeah,
you as you move older and as your life circumstances will definitely impact you. So I
exactly.
completely agree with you over there.
Yeah, so I
So
didn't want to box Brian in or even Ezra too much. I mean, I didn't want to say that, they are definitively gay or queer or, they didn't really attach labels so much because, I do think, who we are at that age can change over time and we grow
right,
and, I don't
right,
think it's
and
so
I
much about
think
the label as sort of finding what feels right to you in the moment and the season of your life.
right, right. Makes sense. Makes sense. No, and I think personally, I think Brian was just too busy at this
Yeah,
point of time to
yeah,
solve his family matters, rather than
exactly.
to figure out what his heart wants and what is his body desiring. I think those were just not there. Like it was like in a back
Yeah,
seat. Yeah.
yeah, it would have felt, and I know we're getting to a little bit of spoiler here, but it would have felt a little too pat for me, I think, to have sort of a
Right.
romantic happy ever after too, because yeah, Brian has a lot on his plate, so
Yeah.
he's still processing a lot of things
A lot of
by
things,
the end of this book.
and we have to remember that he's still young. Like he's not a
Yeah,
teenager. Yeah,
yeah,
he's
he's
not got
he's
everything
just
figured out.
just 13 in this book,
Just
so
30.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So another question that that came to my mind while reading this book was the title. Thanks a lot,
Mhm.
universe. It's both a affirmation. People who have been to therapy, they know thanks a lot universe, you need to do gratitude journaling and all of that, so self-love and everything. So it's kind of that, I mean, so my mind told me that, it's like an ode to that, but I wanted to know from you, like, like what decided the title and what does it mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit sarcastic in Brian's view too, right? He kind of actually uses that phrase right after something goes wrong. So
Right,
it really captured Brian's personality, I think.
right.
And we went back and forth on different titles at different points, but this is kind of the one that everyone landed on, and I'm happy for that because it ended up working out really well. But yeah, it's a little bit of both, right? It's
Yeah, because
you know,
I think you would be able to better tell this, but I think when the book starts, he's really sarcastic about it, as you say, because every bad thing happens. He's like, "Oh, thanks a lot, universe." He's like cursing
yeah,
the universe, but like not exactly cursing it because probably he's too young, so he can't use a curse word. So he's
yeah.
saying, just being superly sarcastic about it, and then you kind of, as you go through with him on this journey, and by the end of the book, I think it kind of does, comes to this place where it's bittersweet and it's no longer
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
sarcastic intention behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. I mean, Brian definitely grows over the course of this book. So yeah.
Right. Okay. So I would want to ask for certain recommendations for people like me who really enjoyed your book. So what would you tell us to read next until and unless we hopefully and potentially get a sequel to your book sometime in the
Okay.
future? So till then, what books would you suggest we read?
Sure. Another one that came out around the same time as mine that has that same kind of, it's laugh out loud hilarious, but it's also got some emotional kind of punch behind it is An Occasionally Happy Family by Cliff
Okay.
Burke. It's about a boy who is dragged on a road trip with his
Right.
dad, which is always a great setting for comic hijinks. But it's shortly after his mom has passed away, and
Right.
he gets the unwelcome surprise that they're meeting his dad's new girlfriend on this road
Okay.
trip. So it's very, very funny, but it's also got this kind of heartfelt piece to it as well. Um, I just read. It's called The Verdigris Pawn by
Okay.
Alyssa Wishingrad. Yeah,
Okay.
really great middle grade fantasy about sort of power and who gets to write history. So it was really interesting, and I think it's out in the 13th in North America. So
Mhm.
I'm not sure where it releases overseas, but it's certainly one to look out for.
Right, right. And the final question for you today would be that what's next? What are we getting to see? Are you in the process of writing something? Is it too early to ask? Can you reveal?
So I'm in the copy edit stage on my next book. Actually,
Okay,
it's one of those ones where can't say too much about it yet. I will say it's middle grade. It's different in that it's got some really spooky kind of sci-fi
ooh,
elements as well. So
okay,
it's yeah, and hopefully I've seen sketches of the cover recently too. So I'm very excited about that. Hopefully I'll have more to share about that soon. But yeah, so that'll be out next spring. So
okay.
yeah, look for my next middle grade book next year.
Right, right, right. Definitely, definitely. And on that note, Chad, I would really like to, thank you for being up right in the morning and talking with me about your beautiful book. Shout out to the artist, brilliant cover. Right.
Yeah, Nick Blanchard. Nick Blanchard is the
Nick
cover
Blanchard,
artist, and
okay,
it's a
yeah, beautiful,
fantastic cover.
beautiful cover.
Yeah.
Thank you for writing the book, beautiful book. And for everyone who's watching this, please know that it's out by Abraham Books. Of course, if you are in India, you can still read it on digital, on your Kindle or on Audible or on any audiobook platform that you use. At Selfie Book, we are trying to get the physical copies, signed editions of Chat very soon, hopefully. I'm keeping my fingers crossed
Yeah.
so that it happens. And I will definitely let you know when that transpires. So thank you and bye bye.